Hi everybody, my name is Philip, and in this video I'll give you a brief introduction to web components with LitElement. So web components are like an umbrella term for a couple of web standards that makes it possible for you to create your own tags for the DOM, for your website or web app, and power them up like, from Angular, React, or Vue, or something like that. So I made a very simple setup here. If you take a look at my package.json, you see that there's only one dependency, which is LitElement itself. And then there's some dev dependencies to Webpack and all that stuff to run a dev server and do a build if we wanted to. Our main TS file is empty. And .ts is the extension name because we're going to be writing this demo in TypeScript. Our person card is defined in its own file that we're going to import from our main entry point. And let me walk you through the person card, the basic implementation that I start out with. So you see that we're defining a class. It's called person card element, and that extends LitElement. So LitElement is a base class from the little library that in turn extends HTML element, which is like the base class of all elements in the DOM. This is necessary to actually create a custom element. We define it with the custom element decorator. So we decorate the class, and for the decorator we pass in the tag name that we want as the first argument. So we say we want an element called person element or person card, and this is the class that defines it. This person card element has a property called person, and for TypeScript I've told it that this is of the type iPerson. So this is just a type that I've manually written out to make it clear what we're working with. And what LitElement gives you is a very simple setup where you just define a render function on it, and LitElement will make sure to then actually render out that template and automatically redo that anytime a property will change. So your render method is going to return a tag template literal, and we return the tag HTML, which is like you can think of that as the templating engine of LitElement. We do that, we write out HTML, it's an import that we get from LitElement, as I said, and then we use backticks to define the actual template. Inside of the template, there are some static parts, and then of course there's some dynamic parts, as there is in pretty much any template. And we write out the dynamic parts using this syntax where we put a $sign and then curly brackets around them, and then we can reference to stuff or things on the class itself. So since we have a property called person, and that person has a name on it, we can reference this.person.name. And if you look at it here, we're doing that as an alt text on the image. We're doing it just in plain text inside of an h5 tag. But the magic is that anything you put in here is actually just a JavaScript expression, which also means that if you wanted to, you can do like a ternary statement like we're doing here. So we're saying if the person actually has a title, then let's render the title with a break tag after it, and if not, then we'll just render nothing, so that we don't get the spare break tag if there is no title. Then in the end, you see that I'm also able to just pass in an expression like this as part of an attribute value like this, and we're pretty flexible to do it just like we want. So this is the basic setup of our thing. And if we go into our terminal and start our Webpack, we should and go to the browser, we should see that now we see a name, a title, and an email. And you can click the email and it's a mail to link, just like we expect. So that's the basics of making a component or an element with LitElement. For elements, styles are always shared, of course. So if you have the same element, it has the same styles. So styles are not instance methods or instance properties. They're actually static properties. So we'll do static styles, and that takes an array of the CSS tag template literal or template literal tag. So we'll do it like this. We'll invoke that with the backticks as well. And in here we can actually just write some styles. Of course, I don't want you to sit here and just look at me type. So I prepared that up front. So I'll paste it in and just walk it through with you. So there's a special selector called :host, and that is the host element itself. So this is the actual person card element that you can assign CSS to. So I'm saying this should be of type display block, and because I'm using some floats, it's supposed to clear them, and there's a margin and all of that stuff. Then you see that I'm actually using an ID of image that refers to the div with the image ID on it. And normally that would be very bad practice, right? But since all the styling and all the JavaScript is actually encapsulated within the element, this is actually a best practice now. Since there's only one image or one IMG with the ID of IMG inside of our element, we're good to go. And this is a very specific and very fast selector. So this is a good way to go. Let's save that and go back and reload the browser. And you see that it's now a little bit prettier for you. The image is not shown though. And that is because what we're using here for the image is actually only a reference to a CSS custom property. And this is how we typically do things when you want to have dynamic things in your CSS, where the CSS is actually shared between multiple instances of the same person card element. So to do that, that's a good opportunity to show you a couple of other tricks that LitElement has up its sleeve. One is that there's a lifecycle method that's called first updated, and I guess that makes that's clear from the name that is run whenever the component is first updated, so the first time the template is actually rendered. So this is a good time to start querying your template for some specific elements. But instead of going in here and doing this query selector or whatever you wanted, there's actually a very easy way to do that as well. So we want to eventually find the image tag. So we'll make a property called image, and then we'll use a different decorator for that. So there's a decorator called query. And if we import that, we call it with the selector that we want to query for. So we can just do #img, which of course is the ID selector of image. And now, once we're inside of our first updated, we can do this.image, and that will refer to the actual to this actual div element. So on here, we can do something like style.setProperty. And then we can actually set the image URL custom property like this, and the value I guess should be something like URL parentheses, and then in here we'll put this person.image. And now if we go back, we can see that the image is rendered out just perfectly. So what we just learned here was a new lifecycle callback that LitElement introduces. So there's still the regular lifecycle callbacks of the DOM. So there's connected callback for when your element goes in, and disconnected callback for when your element goes out. Of course, you can use the constructor if you want to have like the first available callback for whenever your element is created. And then there's actually also a specific callback for whenever any attributes are changed on it. And I want to just talk about that quickly. So attributes are the things that we're used to setting from templates like this, where we set like an ID, or we set like an alt text or something like that, or setting the href of an a tag, and for for attributes, the value can only be a string. And that's perfect for most things, for many things at least. But for something like a person, where we want to pass in a complex object that has like name and email and all of that stuff on it, we want to be able to pass something in that's a little more complex, and that's what we do as a property. So if you go back to my index file, you see that that's actually what I'm doing here. So I'm selecting the person card just by using a regular JavaScript selector, and then I'm just setting .person on it and assigning a rich element to it. And that's the same thing, and that's the thing that actually then becomes this .person in here, right? So for things that can be an attribute or a property, LitElement gives you some helpers to work with this. So there's a property decorator, and if you use it just like this, LitElement is gonna make sure that anytime the value of the person here changes, it's automatically gonna re-render the template for you. So that's a pretty powerful feature. But if I wanted to, I could go in here and define that I want this to be reflected back to an attribute with a given name or whatever I wanted to. But of course, for something rich like this, it doesn't really make any sense. So for now, I'll just turn that off. But of course, a list like this and assigning values to it ourselves is not really that relevant. So instead of that, let's make this into a real app where we actually use it. So let's make a people app. And that's just going to be an element like we've seen before. So let's create a new file. We'll call it people app.element. And in here, now I'm just going to copy paste all of this because you don't want to watch me write that over and over again. And we'll call this the people app. Call it people app component or people app element. And let's see if it works. So let's return the HTML tag and write something like hello world on it. And of course, we need our main entry point to now include both files. So also have the people app element like that. And now we see we get the hello world. Of course, hello world is not what we really want. But what we actually want is maybe to put out the whole list of people. So list of people is h1, and now like if you're used to React, or if you're used to Vue or Angular, you would be looking for something like v4 or ng4 or some kind of special framework way of iterating over a list to actually render out something. But for LitElement, it has an approach that's very similar to how it's actually done in JSX, so in React's templating language. So what we'll actually just do is instantiate a new hole here where we can put our expression in. And let's actually get the data first. So we will make a member here that we call people, and we'll just instantiate it to people that is defined within the people file. So you can see it's just a long list of all my colleagues actually. But now we can do this people and map over them, because it's just regular JavaScript and this is just a regular JavaScript expression. So we do this people.map, that will give us a person, and that will in turn return the template for each person. So in here, let's write out the person card. And the detail to note here is that normally, as you saw before, like if I wanted to attach an alt text, I would do something like this. But if I want to actually mount or attach like a property directly to it, I put a dot in front of the name. So I put a dot in front of the attribute name, and LitElement recognizes that and turns it into a property for us. So since the input that we have, or like the property that we have, is called person, we'll just do .person, and we will actually just put and the value here is person as well, so that's a little confusing maybe, but let's just pass it in like this. And if we do this, now you see that now we actually get the whole list of all my beautiful colleagues, and everything just works out really nice. One other thing I wanted to show you is like how you would then turn your like parts of your styling, make that flexible, as we just saw we did with the image in here. So you see that I've also actually defined a background color. So while the images are loading, the circle is going to be gray if no color is defined, but we're actually defining a color here. So if this color is set, this can actually override the default color. So you see that they're all gray now that I force reload and it's kind of slow again. We're having the default color, but what we actually would like is to just here on the person card just define the style directly, and since styles are basically just a string, we can just do something like this and do, let's set the color to a value, and then in here we'll do the binding and we'll do person.color. And now you see that when we reload, we get all the beautiful colors while we actually wait for the data to load. So it's a very simple way of like making parts of your styling like extendable, or like it's almost like an API for your styles, right? So you could define this color variable anywhere. So if I didn't have it defined on each element, but I just wanted to globally override, instead of having the gray, have it be pink or whatever, I could go back to my index file and I could just define color globally and say this is of course hot pink, and then all of the images are going to be hot pink until they load in. So it's a very flexible way of working with styles, and this is pretty much whatever you want to do, you pretty much can do it like this when it comes to styling. So one last thing I wanted to show was that, of course, your person card might want to have some kind of functionality on it. So let's make a button, and we can imagine that this button will, you know, make this person a favorite, or open up some kind of app, or do whatever. So we'll just have the button say make a favorite. And then we need to listen for whenever this button is clicked. And the way we do that is to use the add signal. So when you put add, then whatever you write after the add is kind of like making an event listener. So here we'll just do add click, and then define a method that will run when this is clicked. So here we'll do this dot make favorite. And of course we need to define that function or that method so that something can actually happen. So here I could, if I wanted to, connect to the server and all that stuff. But typically you don't want the person card element. That should probably be like more like a display element that doesn't know anything about the data that it's receiving. So it shouldn't really know anything about what to do when a button is clicked. So what we want to do here is actually we want to say when the make favorite button is clicked, we want to dispatch an event from our component that says this person should now be favorited, and then our people app that holds the people that knows all the specifics about the app, that should respond to that event and then actually go talk to the server. So the way we do that is that it's just with regular DOM events. So we do this dispatch event. And that takes an event. So let's actually create a new event. If you wanted to, you can do this inline, of course. And the custom event takes two arguments. The first one is the name, and we should probably do something like make favorite. And then we can actually pass something along as the detail of the object. So this name has to be detailed. Then you can put anything as the value here. But of course, we might just want to just send the person back so that anybody who listens for this make favorite event will now know that it's this person that should be favorited. So then we'll dispatch this event, and we're pretty much good to go from in here. So now we want to, maybe out here on the list, we want to then listen for that event. And we do that with the listening syntax that we just saw. And you see that our editor actually knows that this element has a specific event that's called make favorite. So let's just listen for that element. And then we can refer to the local function here that actually then resolves that. So let's call that onMakeFavorite or whatever we wanted to. Of course, we would then define that thing. And here, this event will then actually contain what we're looking for. So it's going to contain the person that we want to be made favorite. So we'll just log something to the console so we can see it working. Make favorite, and it's under detail here. So we say event.detail should now actually be the person that we're looking for. So let's reload, and now let's try to make Adriana our favorite. And you can see that our event is caught from the app itself, so not from the person card, but from the app itself, and it's actually the right person here that's being caught, and we could then go on and send that off to the server. So this was a very brief introduction to LitElement. Of course, there's a lot more to learn, but it is a very small framework, and the API surface is not that big. So head over to the LitElement website, read through the docs if you wanted to, but I hope this kind of makes you interested to learn more about making web components with LitElement. Thank you.